Wounded dog led veteran to crashed plane. Inside was something he never expected. Snow raged like a living thing, sanding skin raw, when Jack Harlan crested the knife-edge ridge behind the bleeding shepherd that had dragged him out of exile. Below, a compact aircraft clung to a ledge, as if afraid to fall. One wing snapped, tail half buried, a dull orange pulse leaking through a fractured window. Inside, a man fussing at a makeshift flame, a young woman wrapped tight, face streaked with soot. Ordinary, almost until her eyes found Jack through the storm. She lifted her hand, not to wave, but to shape frantic silent syllables he knew from rescue drills. Danger, don't trust, help now. Wind drowned every sound, meaning still cut through. The shepherd pressed into Jack's knee, quivering with intent, muzzle scarred, splint-soaked pink. It had not wandered here. It had made a choice. He scoped the cabin interior, between gusts, and caught the oddities. A heater pointed at a sealed panel, instead of people. A flare gun laid ready, not stored. The man's boots sprinkled with mica dust that only came from tunnels, not sky. A crash site that looked staged. A caretaker who never made eye contact with anyone. The woman's fingers changed tempo, tapping a pattern against the glass. 3, 1, 2, 1. Then her gaze flicked to Jack's wrist, widening as if she'd seen a ghost. He followed her stare and felt the leather braid against his skin, the one gift from Ethan he never removed. The caretaker noticed her reaction, turned toward the window, and for a breath their faces aligned. His expression wasn't fear, it was calculation. If he waited, the mountain would bury proof. If he moved, he stepped into a script someone else had written. Why did the dog find Jack, not a town? Why did a stranger know Ethan's braid? Why was heat aimed at a hidden compartment, not the wounded? The next move changes everything. Subscribe now and hold your breath. What's inside that wreck will redraw loyalties and expose a truth Jack never saw coming. Jack Harlan moved through yesterday like a ghost wearing his own skin. In his late 30s, tall and sinewy, he kept the strength of ranger years, yet fatigue lived in every motion. Hazel eyes tilted toward distances from another life. The scream arrived as it always did, silent and then everywhere. Dust swarmed his lungs, bitter with sand and burned metal. Kandahar noon beat down on cracked earth, while cold seeped into bone. He ran under white blindness, boots heavy, rifle pulling at his shoulder, chasing a name. Ethan. Light detonated. The ground flipped into a sheet of pain. Thunder pealed in the sky, then stopped. When sound returned, it brought smoke and a stillness that could break the heart. Ethan's eyes found Jack's across the wreckage, bright with a single unasked question that followed Jack home and never left. He woke with a jolt. The blast became the Colorado gale. Blankets tangled his legs. His heart slammed. Cold sweat glazed his skin. He set bare feet to the boards and breathed through the ash scent from last night's fire, until the present steadied. The vision did not release him. Time moved. The wound did not. He crossed to the compact kitchen, letting muscle memory carry him. The cabin had been chosen for silence and then used as a cell. He locked it from the inside, high in the Rockies. Far from any road, it granted the one gift he trusted: quiet. He dressed in the uniform of retreat, forest green plaid over a soft tee, faded denim, boots scarred by seasons. At the window, he studied snowfall thickening as the afternoon slid toward blue shadow. Wide flakes dropped from a bruised sky, laying down a ruthless white that erased tracks. While arranging fresh logs on the veranda, movement at the timberline caught his eye. A low shape lay where the slope bent inward, too small for elk, too large for fox. Training overruled curiosity. He froze and watched, letting breath move slowly. Snow drifted in veils. The shape did not rise. He waited a minute, then another, feeling cold slip through layers. Go look. He took the flashlight from its hook and stepped into the drifts. Wind tore at his cap. He moved in short switchbacks, letting the beam cut a thin tunnel through white noise. The form gained edges with each yard. A dog lay on its side, and the snow around it wore a stark red halo. The sight flipped a switch in him from watchfulness to work. He went to a knee and kept his body language even, voice low. Up close, the coat showed gray shaded into cream, the frame powerful even in collapse. German Shepherd, 5 or 6 years by the muzzle. Breath steamed faintly, rapid and shallow. One hind leg lay at an angle that denied weight. Along the flank, a deep gash leaked, blood slowed by cold but still dangerous. His hands knew before his mind agreed. Scarred fingers probed gently, mapping damage, testing response. He was no longer the hermit hiding from echoes. He was the sergeant who remembered triage on hot ground. "Easy, buddy," he murmured. "Stay with me." Amber eyes blinked, and held his, bright with pain yet steady, and something like recognition passed between them. "Okay," he said, sliding one arm beneath the chest and the other behind the hips. Weight pressed near 100 pounds, and the snow made each step grind. But he rose and carried. Wind drove ice against his cheeks. The flashlight swung over ghost trees. He placed each boot with care, testing the crust before shifting the load. Inside, he laid the animal on a wool blanket near the hearth, and shut out the storm. He pulled his old medic kit from a locker that smelled of oil and canvas. Supplies carried dates he ignored. Skills kept their edge. He warmed saline, irrigated the wound until it ran clean, trimmed fur with a pocket blade, and closed the gash with a neat ladder of stitches. For the leg he improvised a splint from kindling and torn cloth, bound firm but not cruel. From the bottom of the bag, he drew a small vial of painkiller, calculated the dose, and slid the needle under the skin. The tremor eased. He listened to breathing until he could predict the next rise. Fire laid a slow glow on pine walls and copper pans. He washed blood from his knuckles and sat back against a low chair, shoulders unknotting by degrees. The dog's eyes tracked him with a focus that suggested training rather than chance. Someone had cared. Someone had likely lost him. He set a pot to simmer and cut beef into small pieces. When he returned, the shepherd lifted its head. Jack waited a count to watch for nausea, then placed a bowl of water and a plate near the blanket. The dog looked at him first, seeking permission, then drank and ate in careful bites. A single thump of the tail knocked a curl of ash across the hearthstone. "Shadow," he said into the quiet, testing the name. It fit. The ears twitched as if he had confirmed something already known. Night drew down. He cleaned instruments, coiled bandages, folded gauze and returned the kit to its box. He checked bindings, adjusted wrap tension, and tucked a towel under the splint to prevent rub. He counted breaths the way he used to before a breach, in, out, again. He sat on the floor with his back against the couch, close enough to offer warmth if needed. The room spoke in small sounds, a pop from resin in a log, a faint clink from cooling metal, the hush of wind in the chimney. He studied the shepherd's face, and found intelligence that raised a question. "Where did you come from, and why choose me?" Sleep did not return. He let thoughts pass without chasing them, and for once they curved not toward failure, but toward this breathing life that would not have survived an hour more outside. Saving it returned a function to hands that had done too much saving, and not enough keeping. Near midnight, the dog shifted, tested the leg and settled with a sigh. Jack adjusted the blanket and left his palm there a second longer than needed. Something inside, tight as wire, loosened a knot. He did not name the change. Before first light he fed the fire. He checked bindings with the quiet authority of practice, then walked the perimeter of the room. Everything sat where it should. The rifle on the rack, maps above the desk, the photograph he never turned face up. Morning pressed cold against the glass. Inside, the cabin held heat. He knelt once more beside the shepherd. "You're safe," he said, words unfamiliar, and watched amber eyes blink slow acknowledgement. For years he had sought quiet to keep the world out. Now, a quiet space has been made for duty to return in a different shape. He did not yet know what the animal wanted from him, or what the mountain had chosen for him, only that he had moved when called. Tonight he would not be alone. That felt like both mercy and a beginning. Dawn bled over the snow peaks and softened the cabin into gray hush. For the first time in years, Jack slept without the Kandahar specter. He woke to steady breaths beside the bed. Shadow had dragged its blanket close to the stove and lay curled within the saved heat. "Morning, soldier," Jack said, voice rusty after long silence. He set his feet on the boards. Shadow lifted its head, ears forward, posture straight, eyes taking his measure like a sentry. Habit returned. He fed the stove, set the kettle, brushed embers into glow. Coffee and ash mingled. The shepherd watched without begging, learning cadence. When Jack placed a bowl of water on the floor, the dog looked at him first. "It's for you. Go on." Only then did it drink, pausing to thump its tail once, a precise thanks. The simple grace unsettled him. He unwrapped a bandage and worked in silence. Shadow's flinches were drilled responses, muscle setting, when a hand crossed vision, breath held for the beat before pain, attention fixed on tasks, not faces. "Where did you come from, boy?" The question slipped out. Shadow accepted touch while watching the door, as if pointing beyond timber and drifts toward an obligation waiting there. New light revealed what dusk had hidden. The flank gash he had closed showed edges too true for rock. Burned hairs and a puckered graze lined the ribs. A bullet had shaved the body, knocked the leg crooked, and left a deeper cut when bones struck ice. Cold climbed his spine. Someone fired at a partner and then left it to freeze. Anger arrived hot and clean. He narrowed it into purpose. He checked circulation past the splint, verified warmth under the toes, and adjusted wrap tension. Fluids, small meals, slow range of motion where safe. Shadow endured each step with professionalism that made pity feel wrong. He offered a bite of beef on his palm. The dog took it without touching skin. Wind combed powder off the roof. Outside had simplified to white ridges, black trunks, and a sky like hammered steel. Jack field stripped the rifle, oiled metal, and set pieces in order. Shadow watched from the hearth with the poise of a partner rather than a patient. Midway through the ritual, the shepherd stiffened at a sound too thin for Jack. A low growl rose, not threat but alert. He heard only wind on the eaves, yet he trusted the signal, reassembled the rifle, and placed it within reach. He studied the slope. Tracks from the rescue had blurred under drift. No prints crossed from the saddle. No snapped twigs showed passage through the tree. Whatever had harmed the dog had either vanished or waited close. Shadow nosed his knee. The touch carried intent more than need. Jack cracked a door. The dog limped outside, tested the wind, and locked its gaze on a notch between two spruce crowns. Beyond the metal, the bearing felt exact, not a random scan. Jack marked the line, a pale scar of stone below the notch, a dead snag left, a shadowed fold right. He shut the door and restored heat. He unrolled a USGS sheet and matched feature. The notch sat above a basin, locals avoided in winter, a pocket rimmed by cornices and rime. A narrow saddle funneled storms across it. He respected terrain that created such harsh talk. Pieces set, clean edges, singe, the unwavering alertness, the way Shadow waited for permission before drinking. Signs of a working companion from law, search, military or aviation. It had not wandered. It had navigated hard country to find a door it chose. His door. Purpose moved in him like thought. He traced a cautious approach that skirted gullies and lee slopes, adding bailout points at first stands and rock breaks. He would not launch today. Healing and judgment required patience. He changed dressings near midday. Swelling had steadied. Refill looked fair. Painkillers held. Shadow's eyes stayed bright, gauging him the way partners test partners. When he finished, the tail tapped once. Acknowledgement, not play. He ate a modest lunch and rewound the previous day. Wood stacked, coffee brewed, the prone shape, the lift, the stitching, the splint, breath deepening. Whoever pulled a trigger might have been within a quarter mile, hidden by white. That unknown pressed against the window like a second system. A small whine broke the loop. Shadow stood again at the slit, and fixed on the same notch. The head angle never, ears tilted as if catching a pulse from the ridge. The room changed with that stare, though a wire ran from hearth to horizon. Jack felt the prickle he trusted from old operations. The moment when guesswork hardens into message. "Show me," he said. The dog did not move. The eyes sharpened with a patience that translated plainly. Heal, then go. Orders existed, only not from a radio. He packed a day kit. Stove, fuel, rope, crampons, harness, headlamp, goggles, med roll, bars, blanket, batteries, compass, map. He checked the Remington for distance and the SIG for close quarters. He wrote frequencies on tape along the radio. Preparation steadied breath, and breath steadied thought. Afternoon slid toward blue. Pressure dropped. Another squall rode the ridge like a white tide. If they waited, tracks near that basin would vanish under new drift. If they moved too soon, he could push Shadow past limits and lose them both to ice. He fed the fire and dimmed lamps. The cabin glowed low, a lantern in a field wide. Shadow dozed, woke at nothing he could hear, then slept again. He matched the patient rhythm. The blast memory tried to rise with dusk, yet it lost ground. The dog's presence blocked the doorway where it used to enter. By evening the wind returned. Snow hissed against panes and filled the porch seams with grit. Jack latched shutters and set firearms in reach. He traced the road again, marking distances between breaks, and tried to imagine what waited near that notch. Wreckage, camp, cache, or something stranger that required a trained animal to recruit help instead of running to town. Before bed he knelt beside the shepherd and rubbed under the jaw in slow circles. A pleased sigh rolled out. He checked pupils and gums, adjusted the towel under the splint, and set a fresh bowl within reach. He lay under blankets and listened. Storm and fire argued softly. For once the memory of Ethan did not hit like shrapnel. He pictured the leather braid on his wrist, and the way the woman in the wreck had stared at it through broken glass. The association made no rational sense yet, but it held like a knot. Jack understood, while the cabin breathed and snow whispered along the roof, that Shadow had not simply sought rescue. The dog had come with a mission still running, one impossible to complete alone. Morning would bring judgment about weather and risk, yet the path already existed, drawn from his door to that western notch. He was chosen to follow it. If this tale of unbreakable bonds is stirring your heart, hit that like button now. It fuels more stories like this without pausing the adventure. Days settled into a spare rhythm that began with coaxing embers into flame and ended with stacking wood for night. Jack scheduled dressing changes at sunrise and dusk, washing hands in warm water, laying out gauze, tape, antiseptic, and the narrow scissors he trusted. The gash along Shadow's flank closed beneath neat stitches, and the splinted leg accepted a cautious share of weight each afternoon. Appetite returned. Breathing deepened. Their coordination grew through modest rituals. A nod for food, a nudge for the door, a soft chuff that meant water. Tasks anchored Jack, sanding the edges off dreams that used to rip him awake. On the third morning, the shepherd rose without prompting, circled once, and chose a spot by the hearth with a soldier's poise. Jack checked circulation in the paw, warmed the thigh above the splint with patient pressure, stretched the hip within safe range, and rewarded calm with a narrow strip of cooked beef. He logged swelling, temperature, and gait in a pocket notebook because numbers kept emotion from outrunning judgment. Sleep arrived in even blocks instead of violent scraps, and when memory tried to drag him back into dust and thunder, the steady sound of canine breath pulled him out again. By the fifth day the dog completed deliberate circuits of the single room, nose skating along the boards as if reading a map of scents laid down by storms. Jack watched for guarding or hitching that might warn of overuse, then lengthened the leash on freedom, letting the animal choose route and tempo. He praised restraint over speed because restraint prevents setbacks in tendon and muscle. Progress followed patience, and patience for once did not feel like punishment. Silent camaraderie thickened into something like protocol. He worked, the dog watched. When he finished, a single thump of the tail signed the log. Then something changed. At the wide window that framed the western skyline, Shadow halted, planted forepaws, and fixed on a single sawtooth summit. Beyond the meadow and the black timber, the stare locked with an intensity that suggested coordinates rather than curiosity. Minutes stretched into a rope of time. Snow lifted from the ridge in white streamers that looked like smoke from a hidden stack. The dog did not blink. A low whine vibrated the room, faint at first, then insistent, as if a wire had been strung between the hearth and that peak, and someone had started pulling. Jack tried distraction. He cracked a piece of jerky and offered it palm up. Shadow glanced, then returned focus to the mountain, apology plain in amber eyes. Not hunger, duty. Jack laid a hand along the rough and felt tension like a drawn bow. not panic but readiness. Dusk brought pacing that traced the same narrow lane from fire to glass and back again. Nose touched pane, head turned to him, then swung toward the summit, the message sharpened through repetition. He lifted binoculars and searched teeth and saddles, sweeping for reflection, smoke, color, or motion. Nothing distinguished itself from rime and stone. Still the shepherd insisted, tail rigid, one forepaw raised in a taut point. He weighed trauma. Some injured creatures fixate on a view to push pain into the background, yet this vigil felt different. Precision rather than compulsion, an external hook rather than an inward loop. Purpose lived behind those eyes, patient and unyielding, like a mission brief no one else could hear. At twilight the animal tipped its muzzle to the sky, and released a sound that was not wolf, not fear, not complaint. It was a deep, sorrowing call that carried allegiance. The note settled beneath Jack's sternum, and warmed there like fire found after cold patrol. He knew that tone from dust airstrips and desert nights when people sang to steady hands and remind hearts of promises made, not mourning. Continuity, an oath spoken so the task would not fray. Words rose without thought. "Okay," he said quietly, palm against the dog's neck. "I hear you." A single tail thump answered, gratitude braided with urgency. Shadow nudged him toward the glass, then stood tall, ears forward, drawing a line with its nose toward that same summit, translating direction into posture. Instinct woke like an engine catch. Jack marked rock shapes again. A corniced ridge on the right, a darker rib left, a white bowl between. Wind smudged those features, yet the dog's focus held them steady on the map forming in his head. The rooms seemed smaller with that mountain inside. He crossed to the footlocker by the far wall and lifted the lid. The smell of oiled canvas and metal rose like a message from another life. Coils of rope lay on top, then harness, crampons, ice tools, compact stove, fuel canisters, headlamps, spare batteries, rolled med kit, bivy sack, goggles, compass, laminated maps, a weatherproof notebook, a pencil sharpened at both ends. Below, settled in cut foam, rested the Remington and the SIG, wrapped in silicone cloth. Everything had waited in readiness, not resentment. He checked webbing for fray, inspected stitching, flexed buckles, and opened the medical roll to inventory dressings, hemostatic gauze, airway adjuncts, thermal blankets and analgesics. He cleaned lenses, rethreaded the compass lanyard, added a whistle, and balanced weight between pack and chest rig. Muscle memory set placements, stove high, med kit top, rope flaked for smooth pay, tools lashed outside where gloved hands could reach. When he clicked the pack closed, the cabin seemed to settle, approving the decision without a word. Shadow watched each move, ears rotating with every snap. When Jack set the pack by the door, the dog limped forward and pressed a shoulder to his knee, eyes bright with acknowledgement. No bark, no theatrics, only partnership, quiet and absolute. Weather still argued against haste. The barometer had fallen all afternoon, and the sky wore the metallic sheen that precedes a hard blow. Move too soon and he would risk re-injury and commit to choices on a narrow ridge, with no margin. Move too late, and tracks near the basin would vanish beneath fresh drift. He crouched and met those eyes level. "We go when you can handle it, and the mountain grants a window," he said. Shadow held his gaze, then sank onto the blanket, as if agreeing to wait while the world aligned. Nights lengthened, yet nightmares found little purchase, while duty held the foreground. Jack slept in segments and woke to check swelling, refill water and rotate positions to prevent stiffness. He counted pulses at the groin, tested toes for warmth, timed refill with a thumb press, and encouraged stillness. The shepherd accepted routine with patient dignity, then resumed the watch. The ritual bound them tighter than speed. When wind moaned along the eaves, the dog's presence steadied him more than any lock or rifle. By the 7th morning the limp had eased to a careful trot. Jack extended range to the porch, watching step placement and noting how the back hitched when the surface sloped. Wind had scoured the meadow into a crust that bore weight for 3 strides and collapsed under the 4th. He filed the pattern under hazards, and decided to lay a path with snowshoes and pull the dog across weak sections with a short line, clipped to a padded harness, he stitched from webbing scraps and foam. Shadow tolerated every adjustment with a stoic patience that felt like That afternoon the sky thinned to a dull pearl, gusts slowed, pressure steadied, and light took on the clean clarity that trails a front. Shadow stood at the glass without whining. It simply waited, and the room gathered itself around that stillness. Agreement moved through the air like the first note of a march. Jack lit the stove, set water to boil, and wrote a concise plan in the notebook. Depart, pre-dawn, cross the meadow, along spruce shade, hold east of the creek to avoid wind slabs, gain the shoulder by mid-morning, assess the bowl. He sketched bailout routes to the south, through thicker timber, and marked distances between safe trees where a belay could hold if the crust failed. He ate, fed Shadow a measured ration, and set the alarm. Before turning in, he rested his hand once more on the dog's neck. You lead, he said. The tail moved, in that restrained way he had learned to read as yes. Sleep came clean and quick. When the alarm hummed, the world outside lay in a white hush under cold stars. The moon put a sheen on the ridge that turned the summit into a blur. Jack dressed in layers that wicked, trapped and shed. He laced boots, clipped gaiters, strapped on snowshoes and shouldered the pack. He buckled the compact harness around Shadow's chest and ribs, threaded a short line to his own belt, then checked fit by sliding 2 fingers under each strap. The shepherd stood steady and calm, understanding the shift from recovery to movement without need for speech. He cracked the door. Air bit his lungs. The first step sank, the second held, the third tested crust. Warmth pooled behind them like a remembered promise, orange and small in the dark. Ahead the notch waited, patient as stone. Beside him the dog lifted its nose toward the ridge, and took 2 deliberate steps, then looked back to confirm his presence. Jack nodded once. They moved into the meadow together, 2 figures joined by a silent order. Neither would break, answering a call that had grown louder with healing, and now felt like destiny taking shape in snow. The footlocker sighed when Jack raised its lid. He packed by reflex. Frame backpack, rolled thermals, compact stove, med kit, rope, ice axe, binoculars, GPS, Remington 700, Sig Sauer. He added gloves, goggles, bivy, headlamp, spare batteries, map, compass, energy bars, and a slim coil of paracord. Shadow lay still while he rewound the splint. Jack warmed muscle, checked refill, adjusted padding, and finished with a figure 8, a soft harness crossed chest and ribs, a short tether clipped to his belt. Ready, boy! The tail tapped once. They stepped into dawn under iron cloud. The blizzard crushed visibility to 50 feet. Wind hurled ice like glass shards. Drifts shifted as if alive. Shadow led with economical certainty. Jack followed half a pace back, scanning flanks, gullies, cornices, and sky, keeping the line loose, but felt they used spruce shade where crust held longer. The tether hummed, slack then firm. Snowshoes creaked a steady beat. Every 100 yards he paused to listen beyond wind. White changes voice when weight hides under it. A creek lay under rime. Shadow tested a pane, edge to shallow side, found a line. Jack mirrored angles and stayed upstream, so the dog would not be pulled under if a sheet failed. Poles bit to rock in a cadence that matched the shepherd's pace. Hours gathered around careful movement. Forest thinned to twisted pine. The wind paired everything to simple math. Motion, breath, balance, awareness. When drift rose above Shadow's chest, Jack stamped a platform, spread weight, and hauled the dog up with a tug. 3 legs worked, the injured limb tugged. They gained the lower ridge, a white spine with drops on both sides. Gusts shoved, paused, slammed again. Jack crouched with the axe for balance, edging his snowshoes. Shadow slowed without command. The tether turned from thread to lifeline. Ice ahead looked innocent. Jack picked textured patches and avoided blue sheets. Midway his right shoe kissed a hidden plate and skated. Hip hit slope. Horizon flipped. The drop yawned. The line snapped tight. Training chased panic. He drove the axe. The blade skittered and speed rose. Then a wrench yanked him sideways. The tether held, because Shadow had leapt the other way, and set claws deep, body low, growl rolling with effort. He slammed the axe again, into a scoured seam. Steel bit, wobbled, then set. He pressed chest to ice, kicked points until they held, and let breath count him back in 4 out 4. He inched up while the dog micro-shifted to keep tension. His knee found a knob. He locked, hauled, and rolled onto the crown. He lay cheek to ice, wind screaming, heart pounding, then turned, Shadow still braced, trembling yet unbroken. Jack crawled close, wrapped him and breathed. "You saved me." The tail tapped once. They sheltered behind a bulge of drift. He checked the splint, tendons, heat, no fresh damage. He shortened the tether and studied the ridge. Small breaks to time between gusts, light cutting through like a blade. A window was opening. "Let's finish together." Shadow fixed on the line of ascent. They moved again, tuned to small cues, weight shift, head tilt, the set of an ear when wind funneled. 3 truths ruled: choose the next secure place. Keep the line clean. Watch the partner. The slope steepened. Jack front pointed, and set the axe low, feeding rope in smooth coils. The dog rose beside him in short, sure steps that honored the injury without surrendering pace. They crouched behind a rock while Spindrift hissed like thrown sand. The summit hid behind a curled cornice. They traversed right under that lip where wind had hardened snow into a fragile shell. Jack tested each foot and listened for the hollow drum that warns of failure. None came, only hiss and the faint clink of metal. Shadow hugged the line and never tried to pass. A narrow ramp slanted to a ledge beneath a lipped wall. They took it in slow diagonals, moving pocket to pocket. From there the basin opened. On the far wall a torn fuselage clung to a rock shelf. Smoke bled from a small hole in its roof. Footprints dimpled the lee side in careful lines. Certainty clicked home. This was not a dead site. It was active and intense. Shadow watched him, bright and steady, asking if he now saw what it had known since the morning it found his door. They ate a small ration, and drank warm meltwater. Jack marked bearings, rehearsed an approach that would place him where he needed to be without opening a slide pack. He checked ammunition, cycled the bolt, reseated the sidearm, packed the stove still warm. Focus replaced fear. They followed the ledge until a shallow couloir offered a line into the bolt. Jack set a running belay on rock horns, backed it with pickets where snow allowed, and lowered Shadow in short, controlled steps. At the floor he coiled rope, shortened the tether, and scanned the far wall. The wreck waited, dark against white. Wind eased for a breath. In that hush he heard a faint rhythm, too regular to be random. Tap, pause, tap. The leather braid on his wrist pressed like a reminder. Shadow's ears cut forward. Together, Jack said. They angled for the rocks below the broken plain. The line slack but present. 2 lives moving, as one toward a point where a journey becomes a choice you cannot unmake. Shadow stiffened at the basin rim. Weight forward. A low growl threading the wind. Jack sank behind a boulder and raised binoculars. Through veils of spindrift, he caught hard lines that did not belong. A Beechcraft King Air, wedged on a rock shelf beneath a corniced wall. One propeller chewed. The nose jammed into rime. A black skid scar stitched the slope above the ledge. No tumble. A controlled slide that ended one heartbeat from oblivion. Footprints dimpled the lee snow in a chain from a cut at the tail, to a windbreak of stones and back again. A thin plume leaked from a hand-sized hole, punched in the roof to vent smoke. Life moved inside. Whether it wanted help or wanted help kept away, pinned Jack's breath. Shadow's grazed flank twitched when the weather shifted, memory sparking. The dog's amber eyes never left the fuselage. Signals stacked until the pattern clicked. Not accident, not abandonment. The shepherd had not dragged itself through white hell to a stranger's door by chance. Hostage. Extraction. Tactics replaced awe. Jack studied the wall and chose a line that kept him invisible from the windows. "Stay," he breathed, tapping the harness. Shadow flattened behind stone with a discipline that would have pleased any handler. Jack eased into the basin in a long arc, letting gusts cover steps. Each rock pocket bought 15 feet. He paused at every lull, only wind and ice hiss. At the dead angle beneath the port wing he slid against cold metal, and peered through a fractured pane. Smoke had lacquered the ceiling. A shallow fire guttered in a steel pan, its heat reflected toward a taped panel by foil, and a bent seat back. Not toward people. A young woman sat opposite with a leg splinted straight, using cabin trim and belts. Soot streaked her cheekbones. Rope burn ringed one wrist. A cut near the hairline had clotted. Her gaze was steady. A man in a flight jacket fed scrap to the pan with neat, economical hands. He checked his watch, glanced at the sealed spot. His eyes never sought comfort, only control. A flare gun lay within reach, safety taped. A fixed blade hung in a trimmed sheath lashed to a seat back. Prepared and cold, the man turned to reposition the pan, and the woman's attention flicked to the window. Her face did not change, only her hand moved. Low and tight, thumb tucked, fingers closing and opening in a rapid pulse. The silent plea from abuse campaigns Jack had folded into field briefings. Do not trust him. Ice flooded his veins. He lifted 2 fingers. She shifted her stare to the roof vent, then to the taped panel, then nudged the bag with a boot. Sequence. Location. Jack mapped it inside his skull. Shadow breathed one soft huff behind him, a sound that lived inside the wind. Jack lifted a palm to hold the dog down. The man stood, shrugged deeper into the jacket, and pulled the door inward with practiced care, body blocking the interior. He stepped out with a hatchet, head lower than shoulders, gait cautious, calculation not fear. Jack slid to the tail cone and felt for vibration through aluminum. Footfalls drummed toward the trees. He whispered toward the boulder where the shepherd waited. You were right, we'll get her out. He returned to the window. The woman's lips shaped tiny letters. He read them cleanly. Co-pilot. Vance. She tapped the jacket patch where a name would sit. Not a stranger. Inside. Jack let his gaze take in the mica glitter above the man's boot heels where melt had dried. Shaft dust. Not hanger grit. Old bitterness rose. He pushed it aside. Facts first. He weighed approaches. A frontal push risked flare ignition. A rear service panel might jam. The roof vent offered a blind. Dump snow onto coals. Spike steam. Move in gray. He belly crawled to the shadow of the tail and waited for the pattern he had measured. Vance cut wood every 15 to 20 minutes. When hatchet thuds drifted from the windbreak, Jack returned to shadow and rested a glove on the rough. On my mark, he breathed. The tail tapped. The dog's eyes never left the door. The latch clicked. Cold air knifed through the cabin. Vance turned left toward the tree. Jack counted to 3, levered the cracked frame with a knife tip, and fed a fist of snow onto the pan. Steam burst, smoke mushroomed, and the interior vanished into gray. He hooked elbows, rolled through, landed behind seat. The woman dropped flat and covered her head with a jacket, exactly as his hand signs had asked. He crossed the aisle in 2 low steps, cut tape and peeled the panel enough to confirm a hard-shelled briefcase. Strapped into foam, he left it secured and resealed the tape. Evidence could wait. People could not. He moved to the woman. Jack, he whispered. We're leaving. Her mouth barely shaped sound. Mia Reed. The name struck a wire he would not pluck yet. Bootfalls returned sooner. Jack slid to the hinge side of the door and raised his offhand. Shadow's outline filled the gap below the wing. Ready. Mia pointed to her throat, then flicked 2 fingers toward the window. No shouting, break glass if needed. He nodded. The latch lifted. Wind punched through. Vance stepped in with the hatchet low, and a pistol tucked under his jacket hem. His eyes noted steam. The panel. The woman's posture. His mouth hardened. He began to turn toward the knife. Jack moved first, snapped a palm strike into the wrist, sent the hatchet skidding, then pinned the forearm while jamming the door with his boot, so it could not close. Vance slammed an elbow at Jack's jaw. Jack rolled with it and drove a shoulder into the man's center line, taking space. Vance inhaled to shout. Shadow flashed through, silent and precise, jaws locking onto the forearm with a bone-deep bite that collapsed the next move. Jack looped cord around Vance's elbows and cinched while the dog held, then rolled the man onto his side and anchored wrists to a seat frame. He checked the bite for arterial spray, found none, and gave a clipped command. Shadow released and backed into position. Eyes on the door, chest heaving. Good boy. Jack breathed, already lifting Mia. He cut her sling, braced the splint, and levered her toward the opening. She swallowed pain without sound. Outside, the world roared. Inside, everything narrowed to breaths and inches. The mission had become exactly what the dog had delivered to his door. See the prisoner, confirm the threat, find a way. Now came the part that would decide whether any of them reached the ridge alive. Snow hammered the skin like fists, while the silence beyond the basin waited for their choice, the kind that brands a life. Jack counted the breaths between gusts, measured grip, and met Mia's stare. Resolve answered. Resolve. A pact formed without ceremony. Absolute. This moment of silent desperation hits deep. Share in comments what loyalty means to you, and subscribe to see heroes triumph. Wind bullied the basin for an hour while Jack and Shadow watched from the rocks. Smoke thickened inside the broken cabin, a tar ribbon blown through the roof vent, proof that fuel ran low. Every quarter-hour Vance left to hack wood behind a drift wall, always with the hatchet in his right hand, eyes cutting left then back, a man rehearsing dominance. That pattern gave Jack the window he needed. Stay, he whispered, touching 2 fingers to Shadow's harness. The shepherd flattened behind stone, ears pinned, pupils bright with comprehension. Jack slid down the skid scar, braked with his axe, angled to the blind side beneath the wing, and eased through the fractured window he had loosened earlier. He landed in a crouch, knife forward, pistol holstered, senses open to Smoke's sweet sting and the hull's cold ring. Mia stared, terror ready to ignite, then softened at 4 words. Shadow led me here. Relief trembled through her, tight and contained. He's alive? Jack nodded once. Urgency sharpened everything. Her account poured fast, cut to bone. Vance, the co-pilot, had sabotaged a fuel feed after learning that her father carried documents proving an illegal mining consortium had bribed officials and plotted extraction from protected land. Her father tried to force a survivable landing to protect the file. Vance struck him, seized the controls, skidded onto this ledge, vented the cabin, positioned heat toward a taped panel, and kept Mia alive as cover for an accident. Shadow had been grazed in the scramble and leapt through a gap into the storm, then limped across mountains to find help. I'm getting you out, Jack said, slicing tape from her wrists, checking circulation under the splint he had braced earlier. We move on the next lull. He's chopping now. Steel rang outside. Jack signaled the dog. Shadow streaked across the opening, low and fast, and held beside the hatch as a living gate. Jack looked up, measured the coil above the vent, shoved a scoop of snow through to choke the fire, and turned the cabin into gray. Bootsteps scuffed hard past. Vance rounded the nose with the hatchet raised, and a smile that never touched his eyes. Over? He called, cold amusement in the word. We've barely started. He lunged, swinging for the frame to trap Jack inside. Jack dropped under the arc, slammed a palm into the wrist, and knocked the hatchet aside. Vance drove a knee toward ribs. Jack blocked, answered with a compact hook that staggered but did not drop him. The co-pilot moved like a man who had trained to impose outcomes. They crashed into a seat back. Metal shrieked. Vance latched his hands behind Jack's neck, dragging him toward a rising knee. Jack turned so the strike skimmed shoulder, jammed a forearm under an arm, and wrenched for a shoulder lock that steals leverage and breath. Vance twisted free, jabbed for Jack's eye, chopped at the throat with the other hand. Jack parried, felt nails rake skin, then drove a short punch into the solar plexus. Air left Vance in a bark. He stumbled, stripped a pistol from his waistband, and tried to point it. Jack slammed forward to smother the draw, looped an arm around the neck, dropped his weight, and cinched a rear choke while trapping the gun arm with his hip. Vance clawed, bit and smashed backward, slamming Jack into the doorframe until sparks danced at Vision's edge. Mia gritted through pain, dragged herself by the seats, and kicked Vance's wrist with the heel of her boot. The pistol skittered under a bench. Vance roared, rolled, and drove Jack into the floor, trying to scrape him off. A snarl tore the smoke. Shadow burst through the hatch like a launched spear, collided with Vance's forearm, and clamped down above the wrist with a decisive bite that turned tendons to cable. Jack tightened the choke and whispered, "Hold." The dog held, silent, vibrating with Vance bucked. heels thudding ribs, breath chopping as blood loss and constriction argued for surrender. He grabbed for Jack's eyes again, then flailed toward a knife on the floor. Shadow adjusted higher, teeth finding new purchase. Commitment total. Jack felt the pulse under his bicep flutter and slow. He counted 5 steady seconds. Vance sagged. Jack shifted to a safer head and arm hold in case the man played possum, rolled him, and bound elbows with cord while Shadow maintained guard. Release, Jack's. Shadow eased back, teeth lifting without a tear, and settled by the door, eyes bright, chest heaving. Jack kicked the pistol into a corner, recovered the hatchet, and slid it far from reach. He checked airway and carotid, tightened wrist ties to a seat frame, and frisked jacket, boots and pocket. Spare rounds. Lighter, folded map. A scrap with frequencies. A planner and a coward, dressed as a rescuer. Mia exhaled for the first time since the lunge. "I thought he would kill you both," she whispered. "I thought that smile meant the end." Jack stabilized her leg, inspected the splint, and adjusted padding to shield bone from shock. "We are not finished," he said. "We transfer outside on the next calm beat. I'll raise a mayday and push coordinates until someone listens. If I cannot, I will climb to line of sight and bring help down the ridge." She reached for Shadow with shaking fingers. The shepherd pressed its head into her palm and let out a low hum that steadied the room. Tears cut clean tracks through soot. Outside, wind throttled the fuselage. Inside, calm rebuilt itself. Breath, hands, thought. Jack dragged Vance deeper into the cabin, wedged him with belts, so turbulence could not roll him across the aisle, and twisted a gag from a torn blanket in case the man woke mouthy. He peeled the tape from the panel, only far enough to confirm the hard case still rode in its foam cradle, then sealed it again. Evidence mattered, but living people mattered more. He leaned into the hatch and studied the basin. Spindrift fanned right to left. Between gusts, a small calm opened like a lake, revealed by moving cloud. "On me," he told Mia. She nodded, jaw set. He looped a sling under her thighs and shoulders, locked the splint against his hip, and gestured to Shadow. "Cover." They moved on the lull. Air-sliced cheeks, snow-stabbed eyes. Shadow leapt first, pivoted to scan, then ranged 6 feet and held, a gait that would bite any threat. Jack slid to the rock pocket he had used as a blind, planted Mia in shelter, and returned for the pack. He grabbed the radio, tuned a band, and sent a clipped call, repeating coordinates, head count, injuries, hostile captured, and the need for a helicopter the instant weather allowed rotors to bite. A faint carrier wave answered, thin but present. He repeated the burst and logged time. Inside, Vance groaned and rolled an eye, finding rope, aluminum in the dog's unwavering stare. He tried a smile. It came out crooked, a con sold to himself. Jack met that look, and felt desert heat rise, then fade under mountain cold. He had Shadow, Mia the ridge, the briefcase, the frequencies, and a truth that would not vanish under drift. He had the fight won. The war would wait until every soul left this ledge alive. He returned to Mia and tightened the sling. 2 more moves, he said. First to the couloir, then to the timber. If wind builds, we dig in and wait for a window. If he wakes early, the knots will hold. Shadow touched his knee, then looked toward the notch as if reading the path already written in snow. Promise settled between man and dog. Simple and absolute, finished together. Wind rose, then eased. He counted beats, nodded once, and stood. Time. Shadow slipped ahead. Jack lifted Mia, kept her weight close, and stepped into the blowing white, leaving the man who thought he ruled this basin, bound to a seat, power reduced to blinking and the confrontation had ended, yet the mountains still held a say, and the answers locked inside that taped panel would matter only if the 3 of them reached the trees intact. Jack set his jaw, listened for the dog's cues, and moved with the patience of a soldier who knows that victory means survival before anything else. Snow hissed along the ledge, while purpose hardened inside him, steady as granite. They would leave tracks, not graves, and turn hidden crime into truth. Adrenaline ebbed. Jack tightened knots on Vance's wrists and ankles, lashed cord to a seat frame, checked the gag, and slid the hatchet and pistol under a seat. The ELT was dead. Antenna snapped, casing blistered by the vent fire. He keyed the radio crash site, Elk Mountains, 2 survivors, 1 hostile. Coordinates follow. Numbers flowed steady. Static answered. He logged time and peered through the hatch. Snow scoured the ledge. Smoke thinned. He counted breaths, not doubts, and planned the next minute. Every minute would move them toward trees and law. Every choice had to be clean, deliberate and unafraid. Now, he eased Mia into a rock pocket, cinched the sling to protect the splint, and tucked a blanket around her shoulders. Shadow wedged against her hip, sharing heat with practiced patience. Every 15 minutes Jack transmitted again: position, injuries, hostile restrained, fuel low, weather marginal, then powered down to save battery. Between calls he buried the hard briefcase under tarp and drift, scratched a private mark he could relocate, and retested Vance's bindings, because men who stage crashes do not stop scheming when they wake gagged. Wind climbed, fell, then held. The dog's ears tracked every change like instruments. During a lull, Mia studied Jack's wrist. A strip of braided leather rode there dark against wind-paled skin. Recognition widened her eyes. "Owen, my brother." Jack turned the braid. "Ethan Owen Reed made it for me," he said, hearing his voice change. Tears cut clean tracks through soot. "He made one for you." Lantern glow replaced wreck smoke for a heartbeat. A young ranger knotting leather with careful hands, while promising to watch a friend's back. She touched the braid lightly. The story they had been living shifted. The dog had not fetched a stranger. It had found the man her brother had trusted. Understanding steadied him more than any shelter wall. The shepherd had not chosen a door at random. It had dragged him toward a vow he once spoke without audience. "Guard Ethan's people if fate ever asked." He tucked the blanket under Mia's shoulder and gave the only assurance that mattered. "Your brother's braid brought me here. We'll finish what he started." Shadow's tail tapped once, solemn and sure, as if the animal also remembered a handler with patient hands and a laugh he tried to hide from officers. Wind dropped half a note. Jack keyed the radio, sent coordinates again, and wait. Static thinned into a voice riding rotors. "Copy Elk position. Air asset holding east. Window tentative. Maintain signals." He glared at the dead beacon and improvised a flash with reflective foil, a broken screen and a bent buckle. When the ceiling thinned, he pulsed light toward the knot. He briefed Mia succinctly. She would lift first, Shadow second, Vance under guard, Jack last with the pack. She listened without flinching. Fear had space, but purpose stood in front of it. Minutes stretched into row. Exhaustion throbbed, but warmth pooled beneath the blanket and the dog's weight anchored thought. Jack checked Vance. Gag, pulse pupils, then returned to Mia. Their words were small and precise. The creek below his porch, pears dried in her mother's kitchen, Ethan's habit of smiling with his eyes when he didn't want a sergeant to notice. The wind shifted. Somewhere beyond the ridge a chop gathered, faint at first, then swelling into the arithmetic of rescue. Jack raised the mirror and cut clean signals into cloud. The helicopter slid into the bowl, wary as a hawk testing lift over stone. Jack flashed the mirror, then windmilled his arms, so no one misread the picture. A crewman behind the open door scanned once and understood. Wreck survivors, hostile, cable sang. A medic dropped like a thrown line, boots biting spindrift, and reached them with practiced economy. Jack delivered a tight brief, vitals, splint, evidence cached, threat restrained, while the medic keyed his mic. Competence answered competence. Motion accelerated without chaos. Mia went first, swaddled into a toboggan cradle that spared leg and spine. Shadow bristled, then accepted the lift harness when Jack touched 2 fingers to his ruff, their quiet sign for trust. The shepherd rose steady, eyes never leaving the door until Jack raised his hand again. Vance traveled next, lashed and gagged, escorted by a deputy who descended from a second ship. His power shrank to blinking and breath. Snow blew through the fuselage, erased old prints, and started their departure. Jack rode last with the pack, the coordinates still hot in his throat. The ledge fell away. The wreck became a dark seam on a white wall. Wind hammered skin. Then the world opened. Ridge Valley. The bright slash of river below. Hospitals and forms followed, but so did teams. Recovered the briefcase and documented every page. Flight data copies, satellite prints, transfer ledgers, Shell wrote in a blunt memo, naming a protected watershed with dates and bribe figures. The consortium denied. The record did not. Weeks turned. The elk traded glare for runoff. Shadow healed. A pale arc of scar under new gray. Jack fixed a step, resealed a window, and learned where Mia caught first light on the creek. She slept longer and laughed without flinching. News moved like wind. Charges stuck. The corporate shield cracked. Officials resigned or faced subpoenas. At her father's burial hill, Jack held Ethan's braid in Shadow's leash, and answered the question in Ethan's eyes. Yes, they named the non-profit the Owen Reed Foundation, for the man whose middle name Jack had carried into combat, and whose last gift redirected a stranger through a storm. Its charter stayed sharp and plain: scholarships for children of the fallen, counseling for families staggered by sudden absence, quiet retreats in clean air, and training grants for dogs that find and bring people home. Donations came from crews, towns and strangers who had read about a shepherd that refused to quit. Work began with hammers, rope and coffee. Summer deepened. He taught knots that hold. She filed grants and answered letters from teenagers eager to serve something larger than themselves. Shadow learned to nap anywhere people felt safe. Some mornings they climbed to timberline and left small cairns, where winter had tried to take them. The cairns were not claims. They were thank yous shaped from stone and set where wind could sing around them without knocking them down. On the day the first scholarship letter went out, Jack rubbed the leather braid and whispered, "She's home." The mountain kept its snows. The river ran clear. Fresh tracks crossed old scars and did not vanish. War, for him, ended without ceremony. It ended with an unglamorous chain of right actions that made survival possible and then meaningful. He squeezed Mia's fingers and felt her answer in a promise that required no speech. Shadow rolled, pressed warm weight to his boot, and huffed as if ratifying the treaty they had all signed. With that first rescue glance through cracked glass, survivor became guardian. Home, at last, felt earned. Loyalty rarely shouts. It speaks in steady choices, in hands that lift when storms push down, and in partners who refuse to let the line go slack. Jack, Mia, and Shadow show how one decision, answering a silent signal in a whiteout, can redraw a trauma. Does not vanish. It is faced, named, and carried together. A soldier once haunted by dust and thunder relearned breath on a ridge where wind erased prints as quickly as they formed. A daughter rose from wreckage and stood because courage, when shared, becomes structure. A dog held the course across impossible country until help arrived. That is the promise at the core of this channel. When the gale rises, we tie in, we move with care, and we do not let go. If that promise stirs you, lean in. Join a circle that honors grit, without glamour, and celebrates tenderness, without apology. Subscribe so you never miss a chapter of these high country epics, where skill meets grace. Tap like if the moment on the ledge strengthened your spirit. Share this story with someone crossing their own blizzard, because a timely message can thaw belief. Drop a comment telling us what loyalty means where you live. A late-night ride to a clinic, a chair left open at every holiday, a neighbor plowing a driveway before dawn, a partner waiting at the gate after every shift. Remember how the camera held on that first look through cracked glass. No speech, only a hand spelling danger, a gaze locking to a leather braid, a dog braced at the hatch. That is our grammar. Signals steadiness, follow through. Episodes ahead keep that cadence. You will see quiet victories that arrive after adrenaline fades. Paperwork filed so evidence survives court. Counseling funded so families finally sleep. Scholarships mailed to kids who thought nobody noticed. And trail crews, restoring access so neighbors can return to places they love. We will revisit that ridge to map lessons on wind, cornices, terrain traps, and judgment under pressure. We will track accountability as investigations move from rumor to proof to charges. We will also spotlight volunteers who step into risk, because that is what neighbors do. Our channel is not only spectacle, it is a living campfire, where honest people gather, listen, and leave with heat in their chest. Stories here carry weight and help redistribute it. Community here translates empathy into action. When you subscribe, you help fund missions, production trips, and interviews with survivors who deserve to be heard on their own terms. When you comment, you teach us where to look next. When you share, you widen the search part. When you become a sustaining member, you keep the lights on through long edits and rough weather, so we can show up again on the next ridge. Tell us about the moment you refused to let go. Tell us about the friend who called back after the fifth missed ring. Tell us about the promise kept long after applause faded. Tell us about the dog who found you before you found yourself. Your accounts will echo with Jack's vow, Mia's resolve, and Shadow's vigilance. They will also seed new chapters. We read submissions, verify details, and weave actual experiences into future episodes. With the same care we brought to this rescue, your voice might become the lifeline someone else grabs at 3 in the morning. Parents, show these chapters to teens who crave real stakes. Veterans, leave messages for anyone still wrestling with night battles. They will read your words at 3 in the morning and feel less alone. First responders, tell us which practices deserve amplification. We can highlight procedures that save lives and keep crews safe. Backcountry travelers, study Jack's route planning, wind reading, terrain traps, belay choices, and hypothermia countermeasures. A simple checklist protects your group and the rescuers who may come for you. Advocates, point us toward communities whose stories go ignored. We will listen before we film. Now take a breath and picture the ridge again. The storm softens, tracks reappear, rotor wash lifts snow into a halo, while cables lower held to those who held on. The lens does not cut away. It lingers on hands untying knots, on a woman exhaling after relentless hours, on a dog settling because the person he guarded is finally safe. Save this video to your inspiration list for days that feel gray. Set notifications so the subsequent rescue arrives when you need evidence that persistence outlasts chaos. Let that image remind you that patience married to courage changes outcomes. Before you go, answer one question in the comments. What does loyalty look like when nobody watches? Keep it particular. Keep it lived. We will pin a selection and feature a few in upcoming episodes with consent, because this channel belongs to everyone who believes in steadfast hearts. Then press subscribe, ring the bell, hit like, and deliver this story to one person who carries quiet burden. Your small actions multiply. One click becomes another voice at the campfire. One share becomes a scholarship. One paragraph in a comment becomes a hand on a shoulder. If you want to go further, join our field team as a member. Members help underwrite counseling sessions for families of the fallen, supply packs for search canines, and fund workshops where rural departments train together. Perks include directors' commentaries, map breakdowns, and extended interviews with investigators, aviators, and rescuers. More critical than perks, you will know that your name sits on the manifest for missions that turn fear into forward motion. To everyone who arrived because a shepherd would not quit, thank you. To everyone who stayed because a soldier learned to breathe again, and a survivor chose purpose over panic. You are why we keep filming in sleet, why we caption every frame, why we triple-check coordinates before we publish. We carry your trust like rope. We test it, we retire it when frayed, and we tie new knots when the load increases. That care defines us more than any algorithm ever could. This tale began with 3 lives colliding in a storm, yet it ends in a porch scene repeated across seasons, mugs warm in cold hands, a creek talking below, a dog's head resting on a boot, 2 people planning good work with clear eyes. Healing did not come by running from memory, it came by walking into it together, and refusing to stop before the hard part. The family found in wreckage turned into the family that builds. The war within settled because service moved outward. That friend is redemption written in present. If courage and devotion resonate, join us now. Subscribe for more breathtaking journeys where mercy is a skill, not a mood. Like this episode if it helped you stand taller. Share it with someone who needs proof that a ledge can become a road. Comment with your definition of loyalty, and include one practical example so others can learn. Add your city and country so the map of this community lights up for new viewers. Invite them to sit by the fire, listen, and speak when ready. A new adventure is already loading on your screen. Another storm gathers, another vow waits, another quiet heart steadies, before stepping towards someone who cannot move alone. Do not miss it. Hit play, tie in, and come with us to the next ridge. We will bring you home, together.